what were the things that kind of jumped out to you as being missed on the last episode?
I'm not sure that we missed anything. Um, I think there's some interesting application points that we could hit because we got kind of deep into the science.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some points of application that I was thinking about and would be interested to hear your take and anything that really kind of stuck with you after, having a week or so to let it sink in what your thoughts are.
Yeah. My big thing, we kind of chatted about it a little bit, but with we just kind of left on the note that like what you're calling CNS fatigue is not CNS fatigue. Your CNS is not fatigued. Stop saying it. But then there was no like solution to this problem. It's like, okay, well, I have a problem. I think I have a solution. And you've told me that my solution is incorrect or my explanation of my problem is incorrect. And then you just like, then what? Right. So I definitely think that we owe it to people to kind of like maybe further educate and at least talk around the subject of fatigue. Because we just kind of like, if we're just going to scrap the term CNS fatigue, then what do we call it? And you and I had gone back and forth and it's like, it's just fatigue. You're just tired. And there's a few things around that I think is worth diving into. But you brought up, like feeling tight was one of the things that you brought up.
Yeah, I think the term CNS fatigue could still have a place. It's just maybe not worth the distinction because we're not really measuring it. And it's easier to just say tired or fatigued in general because we don't for sure know, right? So I think it could have a place if we're pretty sure about what's going on. We might be more or less certain that the fatigue that an athlete is feeling is more or less centrally mediated, given what they've been doing in the last couple of days or whatever. But is it worth the distinct? I don't know.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of, what you don't hear much about anymore is adrenal fatigue.
Thank God.
Right? It's like people just went so hard on it that nobody says it anymore. Now everybody talks about how their hormones are imbalanced. And that's like the new adrenal fatigue, which is essentially what it was before. It was just had a different label, an overtraining syndrome. People realize that they're not getting overtrained. Like it's so rare and it's such an extreme thing to have happened to you that they've kind of stopped using it. And my hope is that CNS fatigue follows the same path when people stop saying it.
Yeah, I'm with you. The adrenal fatigue was, I remember being annoyed by that term when I was still in school. I was like, your adrenal glands don't just get tired. Like that's not how it works.
Yeah.
They're, you just feel tired. And most of the time, I bet they don't sleep that well. They're not eating well. Maybe exercise is not even enough, and they're adrenal fatigue. But anyway,
yeah, and again, so they're just tired.
they're just tired.
Right? Like you're just tired.
Yeah,
it would be. I just thought of it being like calling diabetes insulin fatigue.
pancreas fatigue,
pancreatic fatigue.
Yeah.
Oh, you sir have pancreatic fatigue. What?
Oh.
Hormones are out of whack.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could do that with so many different things and it would sound, more and more ridiculous to others. And so maybe that's a good way to make the point. For us, it all sounds equally ridiculous because it's all just the same idea, right? But
I have a little list of what people might feel as CNS fatigue, that it's actually just kind of like indicators or things that will change your perception of how you feel and make you feel like you are fatigued. And one of them being soreness and stiffness. So a lot of times when we do heavy weight training sessions, we get some DOMS afterwards, some delayed onset muscle soreness. And especially if it's heavy, we're going to have stiffness, right? Like because our joints and our tendons and our ligaments are being stressed so aggressively, we're going to have a stiff feeling to our body. And that could be interpreted as fatigue. We talked about this last time about how like some people, probably a smaller percentage than the other way would interpret it as feeling good, but most people will interpret it as feeling poorly. And they're going to say, oh, I'm fatigued. My CNS is fatigued. Another big one is that I think probably is more likely and very hard to quantify, which is why it's really appropriate to throw that label CNS fatigue, is low motivation and low arousal, where a lot of times I have conversations with people about you need to get better at trying harder. You need to practice the skill of trying hard. And that can be focus, right? Like, imagine sitting down to a really difficult read, like that paper that you and I were reading. And it exhausts you. And maybe if you're just starting out, you can only read something like that for 10 minutes before you're too exhausted to continue, or you start to check out. Your motivation starts to decrease. But as you do it more and more and more and more, it gets easier. But trying hard is a skill that I think can be developed. And I think that people, when they try too hard too often, they lose the motivation and they struggle to create the arousal to continue to try hard. And that's a really easy thing to drop the label CNS fatigue on. And then another one that I experience quite a bit is substrate availability. Where I've noticed it most is if I do long, hard runs or long, hard mountain bike rides, I feel a global fatigue in my body. Going down the stairs feels harder than it should be. I get out of breath doing things that I shouldn't be doing, or that I shouldn't be getting out of breath doing. And a lot of that could be substrate availability because you are depleting glycogen. And if you're not replenishing that glycogen through proper diet, then there's going to be low fuel availability. So those are just kind of like 3 things that struck me as potential drivers of what we would call CNS fatigue. What would you add to that list, if anything?
I think you could add some other like emotional states potentially. But I think it's interesting. I think that's a great list. And I think it's interesting to notice that all 3 of those increase with higher volume rather than higher intensity, low volume. Right? Just like
minus soreness and stiffness. Like that feeling of stiffness. If you were to do that workout 8 sets of 2 at 95% of your 1 RM, you would have some joint pain afterwards.
But yeah, joints might be sore. You're right. The deadlifts. I think I would be a lot more sore after a 10K run than 8x2.
Yeah, for sure. Like your calves would be hurting, your quads would probably be a little bit stiff. And same goes for like, if you were to do 10x10 at 70% of your 1 RM, you would have much more muscle soreness than joint soreness.
Yeah.
And that could be interpreted as CNS fatigue, but it all just comes back to fatigue, right? Like you're perceiving this state that you're in and you're ascribing a name to it.
Yeah.
And it's all just folds into the greater umbrella or under the greater umbrella of fatigue, not necessarily CNS fatigue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just kind of like helping people understand what fatigue is, how they're interpreting it, and why it's probably not your CNS.
Yeah.
Some coaching points around Like, it's not a practical and productive coaching model to just tell your athlete your CNS is not fatigued, right? So what you would want to do is you would, well, first, in a perfect world, you'd want to educate them, right? Like, listen to our last podcast. It's just not a real thing. And then try and help them understand. And then you as a coach look to understand how they respond to certain styles of training, because they're going to have these preconceived notions of how a training style is going to affect them. A lot of people will be under the belief that long kind of like endurance style training, especially if it's done on machines because there's no impact, is going to be invigorating and it's actually going to make them feel better, when that might not be the case from a physio. If you were to actually view what's going on, it might be the opposite of that. Like doing a 30-minute plyo session followed by some heavier weights might be the thing that makes somebody physiologically more ready than a longer endurance session. But it's their perception that matters. So if somebody is stuck, you as an athlete or you as a coach who's working with somebody who is stuck under the assumption that this style of training is going to have this effect on my body, it's more likely that that belief will lead to the effect than what the physiology tells us is the truth. That nocebo effect.
Yeah. Yeah. The conscious, emotional, all of that is a huge component of, so it's like that part of that newer model of perceived versus performance fatigue, right? It's like perceived fatigue is huge, right? It can, what you think about how you're feeling is potentially the whole picture.
Yeah, it really can be in a lot of instances, right?
Yeah. Not always, of
So,
course. There's soreness and there's all this stuff, but not saying it's all in your head, right? But sometimes, you can really get in your own way, right?
mhm.
Or you can be completely out of your own way and surprise yourself massively. But just a quick example that comes to mind is like, I've like countless times hit PRs when I was hungover.
Yes.
It's just, your expectations are so low. You're just, you're thinking about other stuff and sometimes it works really well. It's not like a great idea to do that all the time, but just to kind of exemplify how your thoughts and your emotions can kind of get in the way.
Yeah. So coaches, don't just tell your athletes that they're wrong. Respect how they're feeling and try and arrange things around what you know that their response is going to be rather than what you think their response should be.
Yeah.
That kind of leads into this like adaptation response and how everybody responds differently. And you and I have talked about this in the past about how you feel more beat up after heavy training. And I don't feel that beat up. I actually feel quite good, but I do find that endurance work, like I mentioned, when I go for long bike rides and long runs, I do feel tired afterwards. And I feel like it kind of drains me and slows me down, whereas you're the opposite of that. So understanding how different training affects different people. And I've got an example of like how the body responds to stress with novel exercises. So you could take like a 600-pound back squatter and have them do 3 sets of 8 per leg Bulgarian split squats. And they are going to be very sore after that, likely regardless of the weight.
Yeah.
Put a 45-pound dumbbell in each hand. So they're 90 pounds. They're like 15% of their 1RM, and they'll be very sore from that. And that's just our body trying to interpret, understand, respond to this novel stress stimulus, and it will create DOMs without a stress that should be able to create DOMs, or in presence of a stress that shouldn't be able to create DOMs. So that's a really interesting one. Just how our body can kind of betray us like that. I should be ready for this, but my body is like freaking out because it's new and it's never been done before.
Yeah, novelty is the ultimate generator of soreness, but also injury,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you take that same idea of, Bulgarian split squat, um, 1 or 2 sets, and you're sore for 3 days. Even if you didn't even go close to failure, didn't use much weight. This actually happened to me last week. I haven't done split squats in a while, and I did 1 set of 10 at like an RPE 4, 5. And my adductors were cramping and I was sore the next day. It was the easiest thing ever, but just novelty, right? I haven't done it in, I don't know, 3 months maybe, something like that. But you take that same idea and you apply it to connective tissues. They don't heal so fast, right? They don't have a 2-3 day turnaround for a little bit of extra damage or just, more sensitivity than usual. So you do something that you're not ready for, and it stresses the joints more than usual, cartilage, ligaments. You might be in for more than a little bit of soreness for 3 days.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point, where it would be easy to take that 600-pound squatter and be like, oh, this is an appropriate kind of like stress for you, load and volume. Like you can do 120s per hand for 5 sets of 10 per leg. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, my knee and my hip and my lower back are a little bit sore. And 3 months later, my knee is still sore from those Bulgarian split squats that you had me do. Like, oh, and then you're like, obviously, well, we should take a break from those. And then you just go back and you do the exact same thing. Which
Yeah.
is an all too common practice, not with practitioners like you, but in your space, right? That
Yeah. Time off.
like starting low and incrementally building. It's like, oh, just don't do it. If it hurts, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or take time off and then just go back to what you were doing before. It's like, that's not a good idea.
I have this note around high-low training, and high-low training is a really cool idea, but I think it's too rigid in its framework, in that we're just going to call, because it's essentially based on that model of CNS stress, or we call our high training days would be like snatch, clean and jerk, weightlifting above 85%. Our moderate days would be kind of like metcons, CrossFit style metcons, bodybuilding, hypertrophy work. And then our low days would be aerobic sessions. And as long as you don't have too many high days in a row, then you're not going to accumulate too much fatigue. And you got to sprinkle those low and medium days in to balance the training load. And that's fine if the person that you're working with interprets those stresses in that way. So you kind of want to balance that against what's going on. But I think that is a much better metric, which is training impulse, which is basically like cumulative load of a session. So, you think about running would be a really easy one, right? Like you run 5 kilometers, you're taking roughly 1 step every meter. So you've got 5,000 steps, 2,500 steps on each leg, ground contact at like anywhere from 3 to 7 times body weight, depending upon how you're running. And then when you look at that, you're like, oh, this is actually an extremely stressful session, right? As if you were to compare it to just the training load from a heavy barbell session, where you might do like 120 reps in an entire session, 25 back squats, if it's a full body resistance training session, and then like some accessory work, upper body, lower body, core. 100 to 150 reps at a load of, it's probably not going to exceed on average 200 pounds per rep. So that's only 2,000 pounds of stress, or 20,000 pounds of stress, like it would be, right?
Yeah.
100 reps, 200 pounds,
Yeah.
20,000 pounds.
The force magnifier of impact is hard to grasp sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not intuitive, maybe.
Yeah. So educating yourself on trim and just thinking about the stress of a session. And then from a practical coaching perspective, like, you can score it. There's nothing stopping you from scoring your workouts. Like if you're delivering a program and you can write low day, 75 contractions at however many pounds, and then just write the total tonnage in the session.
Mhm.
That's an easy thing to get a little bit of buying your clients.
Yeah. Do you collect like session RP or things like that?
I used to, when I was delivering all my training through Google Docs. I had this little survey that was like, would be like sleep duration, sleep score, motivation to train, session duration, session RPE. And I would kind of monitor that and just like look and see how people were doing. But the problem with those, they say that subjective surveys are quite reliable, but as soon as you start working with kind of higher level people, motivation to train is always 10. Just the session RPE is always lower. Like you watch them and they're just like, hurling after their workout, and they're like, that was a 7. Like, I don't know if we're on the same page about what these numbers mean. So I don't think that, for me, it wasn't as valuable as I hoped it would be. And then now that I've switched to Coach RX, it's not an option in there. But I do look at people's Coach RX is really slick. It can integrate with wearables. So if you've got a Whoop or a Garmin or an Apple Watch, you can look at trends in sleep duration, sleep quality, HRV, which is really valuable.
Nice.
And you can see how they're, and it at least like opens up discussion too. So you're like, okay, training has been stable. We haven't been trying to really push much of anything for the last little while. How come your HRV is in the dumps? And then you look at their sleep and you're like, why are you missing out on an hour of sleep a night? And then you just broach those conversations. So that's a pretty slick part of Coach RX that I really like. And I'll check in, if anything kind of flags my interest in performance, that's the first place that I go to. Or if somebody sends me a message, that was the hardest session I've ever done in my life. Oh, I need to check and see what's going on with your metrics.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice feature. This may be an interesting place to inject like a quick programming discussion, maybe piggybacking off the running example. So we know that even a 5K is relatively high fatigue, right? Because it's pretty high load on the lower body. It's quite a bit of volume. And it's fairly long, right? Relative to like lifting weights.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like total work, time of work.
Yeah. Just to kind of like jump in there. I use my Garmin during my weight training sessions.
Yeah.
And one of the main reasons I like to use it is it makes timing my rest between sets super slick. Like it's basically like a lap button, but it knows work and rest, and then it calculates my reps as well. And in like an hour to an hour and 15 minute weight training session, I'll probably have like 17 active minutes. The rest is rest. And I typically rest, no more than 2 minutes between sets. But a lot of the training that I'm doing right now, it will be like, I'll do like what the session that I did today was, I did some Zercher lunges and I would rest a minute between legs. And then I did bench press on 30 seconds, 2 reps on 30 seconds for 6 rounds. And then I took like a 3-minute rest and I did it again. So I'm not resting a lot. I am pretty short on the rest, and I'm only working for like probably 30 to 35% of my workout. So yeah, like 15 to 20 minutes of work time out of an hour to an hour and 15-minute session. Whereas compared to a 5K, like for an average person, 25-minute 5K is fast. And you're working hard for 25 straight minutes. And when you hear it proposed to you that way, you're like, oh yeah, that actually is way harder. And then when you factor in the load that you're placing at your body, it's like, holy, this is a lot. Sorry to jump in like that.
No, that's perfect. That's because that's a lot of information that will go into this calculus of where do you put that given all that information? Do you put that potentially on a day with like just a bunch of upper body gymnastics? Do you put it as the second session in a day rather than the first because of the potential, central fatigue? Or do you kind of just count it as, lower body? It's forget about central fatigue. It's like lower body is going to be fatigued after that. So we can still hit the upper body pretty hard. Maybe you want to do the upper body stuff first. What do you think?
I think it comes down to the first question you want to ask is, what is the priority?
Yeah.
If your goal is to get better at running, then I think that should come first in the session. So by example, today, the workout that I did was 10 Zercher lunges per leg for 5 rounds with a minute rest between legs. It was like hard and sweaty. It's what you would typically use as a finisher. But I'm trying to get ready to do some hard hikes this summer. And I want my legs in single leg stance to be very strong and very durable. So I put that the first in the session. And then I went into some kind of like more max effort bench and some repetition effort pull-ups and bent over rows. So my order in terms of how you would normally structure training is a little bit backwards, but I'm putting the most important thing to me first in the training session. So if you have somebody who's training a double day and they are a terrible runner and you need to put some effort into making them a better runner, I would suggest that you put that early in the day. If they are a terrible weightlifter or if they are terrible at gymnastics, then that should go first in the day, first in the session, because they're going to be most fresh around that and they're going to be able to put the most amount of effort into it. So whether it be session organization, daily organization, I think that should be your primary consideration. Another thing that I look at is the signaling pathways for strength, hypertrophy adaptations, and endurance adaptations. So mTOR, AMPK, those are important to consider, but again, they're going to come secondary to priority, where mTOR pathway typically stays open for about 4 hours. So after you lift, mTOR opens, it does its cascade, you start laying, all the work happens to build the muscle and drive repair. And then after that, you're free and clear. You can do whatever you want. But AMPK stays open for like 24 hours. And those two pathways are in competition for resources with one another. So if you were theoretically to put your long endurance aerobic session early in the day and then think that you're going to get the most out of your strength session later in the day, those two competing pathways are going to have some level of interference. And I think it's easy to overstate the importance of that, because prioritization should take place more than just being like, oh, mTOR, AMPK. We cannot let these two compete with one another. We have to put strength in the morning. We have to put endurance exercise in the afternoon. It's the only way. But it reminds me of a kind of like a dilemma that I faced when I was running the gym, which was like, good and done is better than perfect, but ignored. I would get caught up in doing I would work for hours on a social media post. And then I'd be like, oh, I'm out of time and it's not done. And then they would just never get posted. I'm like, you know what? This is done. I'm just going to write some shit down, throw up a pic and make sure that it goes on Instagram. And so you have to make sure that you're actually getting your training in. You can't let these smaller details interfere with what's most important to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty good summary. Yeah. The interference effect is real and, is more and more important the more training you do or the higher the level you're at. But it's not everything. And, you can still adapt. The literature on the interference effect is pretty mixed, right? Like it takes quite a lot of endurance training to really interfere with strength training. Um, a little less to interfere with hypertrophy for the reasons you talked about, right? The signaling for mTOR specifically is what's being interfered with, but the neurological adaptations aren't really being interfered with as much, right? So you can get stronger and you can develop your skills with less interference than maybe building muscle at a maximal rate.
Mhm. Which is also an interesting point to make, is that strength is specific. Like, as much as you are building muscle, you are practicing a skill. People don't like to think of something like a squat or a deadlift as a skill, but you are getting better at that. As you get stronger and as you see your squat and your deadlift numbers increase, you're probably building muscle, but it's not the main driver of how much more weight you are lifting in that exercise. The main driver is the fact that you're getting better. So you're learning to try harder. You can motivate yourself and create more arousal to put a greater effort and more central drive, descending drive towards those muscles. You're improving muscle synergy. So the muscles that work together to drive the joint into the proper angle. And then also on the flip side, those antagonist muscles that need to learn how to relax or need to learn the appropriate amount of co-contraction so that the joint angle and the joint position can be optimized so that you generate force as best as you possibly can. Those are just skills. You're just getting better at what you're doing. And that's only really two examples of a myriad of things that are happening to make you better.
Yeah. Yeah. Muscle mass doesn't become the primary determinant until the elite level in powerlifting, until everyone's so good that the only thing you can do is get bigger.
Yeah. And that's why bodybuilders are not the strongest, right? Like bodybuilders have the most amount of muscle and they are very strong. You have to be strong to get that big, but they're not the strongest.
Yeah. And it's because they don't practice that skill. Most of them probably don't do anything below 5 reps ever.
They're probably way stronger at like side delt raises than any powerlifter is ever going to be because they're pushing themselves on those types of, or bicep curls, they're pushing themselves on those types of exercises, calf raises, you name any kind of like classic bodybuilder exercise, they're going to be able to outperform a powerlifter. But as soon as you get into specifics, then it's mostly skill based.
Yeah. Good and done, better than perfect, but ignored.
Yeah.
Like it. Yeah. I think that was definitely, the interference effect, the, session organization or the organization of the day, that all makes sense. I think I would say for the single session design, like the order, I 100% agree with you. I think there's probably a little bit more wiggle room if you're doing a double day and it's separated by a good bit of time. I think you could still do, something that's not the priority second, but it depends on the
Like
person.
second in the day, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah. And you would want to consider also, again, like how the athlete feels, right? So you might want to assume that the person is going to be freshest in the morning, but they actually work 7 to 3, right? And so if they're going to fit in a session in the morning, they have to wake up at 5 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. to get their session in. And at that time of day, they're just not. they're not at their best. They're feeling much better at the end of the day. So you put their priority session in the place where they're going to have the greatest level of performance.
Yeah. Agreed. What else you got?
Well, that's everything that I had. You've got some notes here.
Yeah. The other things that I was thinking about are similar to what we just talked about, but with some of those other variables in mind, like the pain, the inhibition that comes from the pain of a workout, right? So maybe the most, and this is probably already stuff that you just do without, the reasoning of these specific pathways. Like it's just good training, good coaching practice because we know that it works. It's interesting to think about with this information in mind. Definitely putting more painful stuff later in a session because you're going to be feeling like trash after that.
And it's going to exhaust central drive.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you put in 100 banded tricep press downs unbroken into a session, and then you're like, okay, now we're going to go do heavy back squats. That ability to try hard is going to be at least exhausted to some point, right? Like it's going to be fatigued.
Yeah.
Because you put so much effort into the triceps. So that descending drive is you're just not going to have the motivation, the arousal to hit your heavy back squats, even though it's just your triceps.
Yeah.
You're probably going to feel a little bit fatigued because you have to push through so much discomfort with those 100 tricep press downs.
Yeah. Yeah. The pain. And then we touched on this briefly, but I thought it'd be interesting to flesh it out a little bit more. But we talked about how an open-ended workout, athletes go way slower. If they don't know where the finish line is, they can't push as hard, right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, and we kind of knew, anyone that's done CrossFit kind of knows this intuitively, right? If you know how many rounds you're doing, you can push harder, especially on the last couple. But if it's an AMRAP, especially a really long AMRAP, you start off kind of slow because or you don't, and then you die, right? So, and then you learn potentially to not do that. So maybe that is a useful piece of information for actually designing sessions, but also maybe organizing like mesocycles. Maybe when you're trying to peak somebody, you're not giving them AMRAPs because you know they probably won't push quite as hard.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just from kind of like an art side of programming, I think it's a really good suggestion. If you want people to push, give them a reason to push. And that would be exactly what you're trying to do during a peaking phase. It's like test them, let them find their limits.
Yeah.
Yeah, good suggestion.
And then, you probably want to have AMRAPs sprinkled in just, for the game aspect. But yeah, that was one that I was thinking about.
And on the flip side, you could use AMRAPs during a kind of like what you hope to be a lower stress training cycle where, okay, we're going to focus on strength for this cycle. We're not going to do many rounds for time workouts. We're going to keep everything AMRAP because I know that you're not going to work as hard.
Yeah. And then maybe an intermediate case is multiple short AMRAPs with rest in between, where they've got a time domain finish line, but not a total work finish line. So still slightly more paced potentially, but also a little bit of rest, which allows you to recover and push a little bit harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of a bridge strategy.
Mm-hmm. We did one of those today. 6 sets of 2-minute AMRAP of bike, 7 cals and 3 muscle ups.
6 sets, 2-minute AMRAP, 2-minute rests?
1 minute
Oh,
rest.
sorry. Oh, how many rounds?
6,
2 rounds per set.
2.5 until the last 2.
Oh, so you're getting 36 muscle ups, essentially.
Yeah, I think I got 42.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I try and track. We were talking about novel stimulus and so on, injury prevention. And it's like, I want to know how many reps you're doing in a session and in a week. And I want to stabilize that volume load. And we can tweak things like, like do the difference between doing 50 muscle ups in a session paired with skiing, paired with biking, paired with rowing, paired with running is minimal compared to doing 50 muscle ups in a session and 75 muscle ups in a session. So if you're like, week 1, we're going to do 50 muscle ups and we're going to bike. And then week 2, we do 50 muscle ups in some format and we're going to ski with it. It's not the same, but it's pretty close. But if in week 3, you're like, let's try 75. That is a massive jump, a 50% increase in volume. That's going to surprise people from a fatigue standpoint.
Yeah, that's a big jump. Yeah, definitely an easy thing and an important thing to track is, total reps of some things, and then that, load volume or mileage, this and that, right? Yeah.
You propose putting rest days after longer workouts, like workouts that we know to be more fatiguing physiologically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could argue it either way. You'd have to. What it would come down to is a survey of the person. How do they perform after those longer workouts? If they feel great and they consistently perform very well after longer workouts, like if you program, whatever 40-minute zone 3 run and they're just like chomping at the bit the next day, then fine. But that's not me. I'm going to be tired.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to depend for sure on the person, right? And just like with the novelty, right? What are you used to? What are you good at? What do you think about? What's your perceived fatigue from these things? What's your expectation of these things? Yeah, it definitely depends. But really big, really long stuff, I think probably would be generally the place to put rest after. But yeah.
I would agree with that. Intuitively, you
Yeah.
could think of programming your week almost similar to how you would program your session, right? Like if Sunday is a rest day, Monday is your most technical, most engaging task. Tuesday is something that you need to try hard on. And then Wednesday before a rest day is something that you don't need to try very hard on, but you can accumulate loads and loads and loads of fatigue because you don't have to try very hard. So you're kind of taking account of fatigue as it progresses. I want to continue to stress you aggressively. So I'm going to give you running. All you have to do is go out and try hard. Like you just stay engaged in the task, or rowing intervals, right? 30 on, 30 off, 20 rounds, 10-minute rest times 3. Like all you have to do is just keep yanking on that rower versus skill practice. If you do that and it's like, okay, we're going to work on handstand walking now, and you're just absolutely cooked, there's just no way it's going to happen. So I think that does make the most amount of sense for sure.
Yeah. And then you might have, again, with lots of room for adjustment, you might have the highly technical stuff, the high power production requirement early. So gymnastics, technical gymnastics early, max effort, Olympic weightlifting kind of early, either in the day, in the session, or in the week to get it out of the way before the higher fatigue stuff. And then your intermediate is like your strength, like like you were saying. So that kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with those kind of progressively changing demands and consequences.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I like to design my training programs is performance demand, recovery demand.
Mm,
And I will always put a high performance demand workout following a low recovery demand workout.
yeah.
Um, so if you're going to, like that rowing example that I gave, somebody's probably going to be pretty tired. Most people would be pretty tired after that. Or like, if you were to do 3 10-minute AMRAPs at a high effort, you're going to be probably pretty tired. You're going to have some soreness, especially if you do things like a dynamic eccentric, thrusters, wall balls, that kind of double unders. The people will be tired from that. And you're probably not going to then want to, on the very next day, do something that has a high performance demand, which would be something like technical gymnastics or um, max effort weightlifting, because they're just likely to be a little bit zapped from, they're going to be feeling what we would call CNS fatigue, even though it's coming from something that's not typically associated with CNS fatigue. They're going to be feeling fatigued. And they're not going to be able to put their best effort into that training session. So long as that training session is a priority. So what I've kind of moved away from that model over the past 6 or so months and moved into e-session programming.
Yeah.
So when I design, what I'll do, like my kind of workflow goes, okay, this is the place we are in the season. What are the things we want to focus on? We want to focus on building endurance. We want to focus on technical gymnastics, maximal strength, technical weightlifting. And then those I'll design between 1 and 3 sessions that are specific to the priority. And those become my key sessions. I look at their schedule. What's your work schedule? What's this and what's that? And then I put those key sessions in, and then I program around those. That works really well because, I've got like some shift workers. So I've got a guy who works as a firefighter and they work 24-hour shifts. So I always put my key sessions following on his days off. And it's always the first one in his block of days off, because I know that that's where he's going to be freshest, or the second session, depending upon what that shift looks like. So sometimes they'll work like, 7 to 7, not to 1900, but
Yeah.
the 0700 to 0700. I'm not going to drop in a key session at 0900 after a 24-hour shift. So we would go another 0700 before he hits his first key session. And I think that works better for me, is programming around key sessions.
Yeah. I like that strategy and good terminology too.
In our message, you brought up feeling tight. I want to hear how that kind of like comes together with what we're talking about now.
Yeah. How did it come about? It was, you were mentioning it. I mean, there's something, it must have been something to do with fatigue.
Your message says your take-home message was great. There's a really similar phenomenon in rehab we could talk about at some point. Feeling tight.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So your take-home message last week was, well, do you remember? You can just
I don't remember actually.
It was along the lines of, what you are feeling is not necessarily what is going on.
Oh yeah.
You might feel tired, you feel beat up or whatever, but you can probably still put out a lot of good effort and perform really well. And that is exemplified in clinic every single day. It's, this is tight, that's tight. It's just a word that I think Well, it's what they're feeling, right? It feels tight. Usually they're talking about their neck and their upper back. And most often they have no limitation in their range of motion. So they have, no physiologic muscle stiffness. It's like their head goes as far as it needs to go. They can turn, they can look around, chin to chest, all good. But it feels tight. And they will massage it endlessly with lacrosse balls, or they'll go to actual massage and they will just hammer them. And it doesn't change when you dig in on it. It just continues to feel tight. And it's just not what's going on, right? There is no excess of tension in the muscles, either in an acute sense in that moment, or over the longer term in terms of like actually using the musculature, putting mechanical tension on the muscles. If anything, it's the opposite. They don't do enough. So that feeling of tightness is not what's going on, but it is what they feel. And so you got to try to just use that as a point of education, and massage will help briefly. Probably adjustments can help briefly with that. But if they've got a neck injury, some sort of, in this case, with the upper back and the neck feeling tight all the time, probably like that lower cervical disc or nerve root irritation that causes that kind of pattern, goes down the inside of one shoulder blade, feels tight, or just degenerative changes at that level. It's going to take some other things to make that feel better than just stretching the shit out of it or massaging it all the time. So
we add to your example of lower cervical, like nerve irritation, ribs being out.
just, man, I think I've come up with, okay. So no, sorry. I'll tackle the rib thing first.
The ribs. Because I feel that right now. It's like, it's so embedded in my brain. I've got this stiff spot just medial to my shoulder blade, and I like move my shoulder and it feels like my rib is going to crack back in. I know better, but it just feels like that's exactly what needs to take place. This rib must be posteriorly displaced and something needs to thrust it back in, and that will make me feel better. And it's so funny because I know that I know what's causing it. I know that it's not my rib, but it feels so much like that's what it is that I just can't get past it.
When it does crack, does it go away completely?
It doesn't crack.
Oh,
I can't crack it on my own, and I don't have anybody strong enough in my family to crack it. And I don't get adjustments on a regular basis ever, actually. So,
yeah. It's funny because often, well, some patients will have a 100% resolution after an adjustment. Others won't, but it'll sometimes, there's a whole spectrum of responses. I'd say that there's like a disproportionate number that get a full resolution from a single adjustment with that particular pain than any other condition, because of what it feels like, probably. Right?
It's so funny,
yeah,
because you're like, this is not what's happening, but I can fix it with this.
yeah.
And it's exactly in alignment with what we're talking about with like CNS fatigue. You are not experiencing CNS fatigue, but if we just treat it like that, we can actually create some pretty positive change.
Yeah. Side note, for me, when maybe I haven't had that particular pain in a while, but when I have pain in that area, it doesn't go away when it cracks. Probably because I know that that's not what's going on.
Yeah.
So there's the other end. But just to pop in an analogy, I think this is the best I could come up with so far. Maybe I'll develop it more, but when somebody is really obsessed with that, not obsessed, they can't let go of the tightness thing, right? They come in, it's just tight, it's tight, it's tight every time. Um, what my analogy is things can feel, and if anyone's had like sciatica or whatever, or a headache, right? It feels like something's squeezing your head, but nothing, there's no pressure. Nothing's squeezing your head. Your intracranial pressure is not increased. Or if you've had nerve pain, it can feel like burning or an electric shock. And of course, there's no burning or electric current going through there. And sometimes that'll snap them out of it. It's like, oh, okay. So it's not tight. But then they'll come back the next time and be like, it's tight. It's like, all right.
Yes. Doctor, it's tight again.
Yeah. Okay. It's tight.
Yeah. And then, so what do you do in an instance like that? How do you treat it?
Well, the treatment is, it depends on what I think is the underlying cause. Most of the time with that pattern, I think it's, lower cervical joint or disc or, those types of things. Sometimes it is like muscle pain from repetitive use or prolonged use. Because if they don't have signs of anything else, it looks a little different. Maybe not quite the same pattern, but I usually kind of give them a little bit of what they want or what they expect, because it does often help at least a little bit. And if you don't, they probably aren't going to get the things that they really need later on. So, a little bit of active release type stuff, maybe an adjustment, and then try to slowly start to build in exercise in some capacity. And then, changing the habits, most often the things that are actually causing it. So sitting at a desk for 8 or 9 hours without taking many breaks. Sometimes repetitive use, injuries, trying to change how they complete those tasks. Those are kind of the main things. But yeah, a little bit of neck strengthening potentially. And more and more lately, I've just been like telling people to do like shoulder shrugs if their traps feel tight, because they stretch the shit out of them and they sometimes realize that it's not helping. So I'm like, do the opposite, just like squeeze them, get some blood flow in there, and maybe do the shrugs with some dumbbells.
So funny.
Yeah.
Do the opposite. That thing that you've been doing for the last 6 months, it's not working.
Yeah.
Let's try the opposite of that.
Yeah. Costanza.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like low back pain, right? Like people who are just like terrified of flexion. Like, why don't we try flexing your spine?
Yeah. Yeah. You've been avoiding any movement there. So now movement is novel, and that's why it kind of makes you sore or whatever. So the solution to that is a progression of movement to adapt and decrease sensitivity and increase tolerance and stuff, right?
Yeah. I know that we kind of like kicked off by saying, well, what we should provide listeners with is like a practical takeaway from this. But what I kind of want to finish on is more examples of how badly our nervous system can trick us. Like the headache example, right? Like it feels like my head is being crushed. You're like, but it's not. Do you have any other like worthy anecdotes around how our nervous system can trick us into sensing something that is not present?
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, I think the best ones are not things that I will see clinically, but there's an endless number of them, from psych classes or pop psych books that I've read. All the logical fallacies, all of the, impairments in memory and things like that. But like the mirror illusion, right? If you have subjects set up both hands on the table. They put a mirror in between them. So basically when you see your right hand, and then you see a reflection of your right hand as your left hand, and your left hand is like hidden under a box or something like that. And you stroke both hands with like a feather or something. And then you stop stroking the left hand and you keep stroking the left hand, or sorry, keep stroking the right hand. You will keep feeling it on the left hand by looking at the reflection of them stroking it in the mirror. That's an easy, kind of a fun example.
You ever see those real videos where people will hold up their phone with it's got like a bug filter on it? They're like, "Hey, we're on FaceTime," and then the other person checks in and it filters a bug crawling over their face, and they lose it, man. They're like hitting themselves in the face and going, "There was a bug on my face," but it was just a filter on a phone. Similar idea, I guess. You feel it.
Yeah. They probably did feel something on their face when they saw that.
Yeah.
Potentially. And then, if you know that that's what it is, you definitely wouldn't feel it, right? So you can snap out of those things pretty quick. But there's all kinds of illusions and things that you actually can't snap out of, because you just can't, no matter what you think about it, it's whatever the reasons are physiologically, you just can't see it another way. So like the mask, the rotating mask. Have you ever seen that one?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Where it's like the inside versus the outside.
Yeah. So it's a mask it's a video of a mask that's spinning. And as soon as it gets to just past 90 degrees where you're about to see the back of the mask, you see the front of the mask again.
Yeah.
And you never are able to see a concave face, essentially, right? So the back side of a face. And I think that's one where like almost nobody can see the back. They always see it as the front.
Even though they can see the back coming.
They can see the back coming. They know it's not a real face. It's like a video of a mask of a face. Still can't get around it.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's pretty cool.
I did hear that a certain condition allows those people to see the back of it. Some psychiatric condition. Can't remember which one.
There's also like phantom limb pain.
Yeah.
Is an obvious one too, right? Like people have amputated limbs and their hand hurts. Like, this is not possible. You don't have a hand. It can't hurt.
Yeah, there's nothing there, but they feel it.
Cool. Anything else to add?
No, I think that's a good couple of episodes on fatigue. We'll probably come back to it at some point, but that was a good.
Yeah, we've got the base laid.
Yeah, that was solid. And maybe we'll be having our first guest on soon.
All right, man. I'm gonna jump off. That was good.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
See ya.